where are you keeping all your things, your clothes and things like that? He said, what does that have to do with anything? I said, well, it's only going to take me about, I would say, 1 or 2 minutes to convince you that God exists. I just want to know how far away all those things are so we can go and pick them up. And he was like a little shocked when I said that. So he said, look, well, first convince me, then I'll tell you where all my stuff is. So in a short period of time, I gave an argument, not an argument, but some statements that convinced him that God exists. And he said, okay, I will go with you. So we went, picked up his things and brought him to the temple, and he became a devotee. So we have to be trained to be able to answer people's questions in a substantive way, in a real way. And if we simply repeat what Prabhupada has said, we'll be able to do that. If we make up our own explanations, it'll never really work. So Prabhupada has said, look, it is self-evident truth that every living entity has a mother and father. And their mother and father, they also have mothers and fathers. And if you keep going back far enough, you don't end up with nobody, and you don't end up with a monkey. You always end up with a person. And the original person is Krishna. So that's one argument to understand the existence of God. Now, stupid people, they'll say, well, no, I think I have a monkey in my family if I go back far enough. So they try and make these false arguments based on phony Darwinism. But the fact is that you always have people, human beings, and the ultimate supreme being, Krishna, as the father of everyone. And Krishna says that, Aham sarvasya prabhavo matak sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. 10th chapter, 8th verse of Bhagavad Gita, that says that everything material and spiritual is coming from me. So, obviously, there is an original ancestor of all living entities. Even in Darwin, it says there's some kind of primordial ancestor of all living beings. Well, he calls that the first amoeba, but there's no explanation of how the first amoeba came about. But then after the first amoeba somehow or other came about, then Darwin says, well, I can explain the rest of it. But it's a bunch of nonsense. Anyway, it makes much more sense that there is a supremely intelligent person who is the author of the entire material creation. Why? Because everything is organized in the material nature. Nothing is haphazard. There's no chaos. There's always, let's say, predictability in the material world. Even the scientists accept that. The scientists accept that nature acts in an orderly way. Where did that order come from? No order that human beings have created was done haphazardly. Like you look at object-oriented techniques for making programs. Everything is planned to not have any mistakes, and it's all intelligence-driven. Everything that is made by mankind is intelligence-driven. But yet, when they see the material world, they want to say that it all happened by accident. So they are the least rational people. The scientists and philosophers are the least rational people, because they try and make up fake theories that do not really explain things and leave people frustrated. So that's why a lot of people say, look, I'm not interested in philosophy, because everybody has their own philosophy, and one philosopher is trying to outdo another philosopher. I'm just getting confused. So I'm not going to read anything. I'm just going to have sense gratification. That's the solution most people come to out of frustration. If you take a philosophy course, you're going to hear what this one said and that one said, and they're all going to have different takes on what is reality and what is false and this and that. And people get confused and they get upset. And they finally just say, I don't care what anybody says. Whatever I think, that's enough for me. So here we see Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's explaining who he is. He's explaining how to relate to him. He's explaining what is the material nature and how to relate to that. And all this knowledge is coming in one little simple book called the Bhagavad Gita. All we need to do is just study this one book, and we'll have all knowledge. We don't have to study any other book. But most people want to read this book, that book, and there was once this person who was a guru. He was giving a lecture and to his disciples, and one man interrupted the lecture. He walked in and interrupted the lecture, and he said to the guru, he said, what do you think? I have read this book, I have read that book. And he gave a list of books that he had read. He said, what is your opinion about my understanding of knowledge? So the guru said, well, you can go home now, and I'll send you my answer. He said, okay. So he left, and the guru continued instructing his disciples. And then he called one of his disciples and he said, go and get a bottle and put different colored sand in it in different levels and bring it to me. So his disciple did that. And there was a bottle, and it had like some red powder and some green powder and some yellow powder and some purple powder in different levels in the bottle. And then the guru wrote a note, and he said, take this to this man and tell him this is my answer. So he took the bottle to the man, and there was this note. He said, my dear friend, when you get the bottle, I want you to shake it up and down really well for about 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then you will have the answer. So the man said, okay. So he gets the bottle, he looks at it, and there's these different colors. So he starts shaking it like this real hard for a few minutes, and then he stops, and he looks at it, and now it's all gray. So he got confused, and so he went to see the guru. He said, I don't understand your answer. I said, I shook the bottle. Before it had these different levels of colors, and when I shook it really good, it became all gray. So what's the answer? He says, that's your answer. You have so many theories, and in the end, they're all wrong. And therefore, you don't have any concrete knowledge of what is the truth and what is illusion. So this is a very interesting way to make a point. But that is the point. The more theories we have, the more confused we become. Because a theory is not necessarily truth. It's simply a theory. A theory is something that has a little bit of predictability. If it has up to 50% predictability, it's called a scientific theory. But it's not a fact. A fact has 100% predictability. Just like every man, he says, all men are mortal. John is a man, therefore John is mortal. Well, there's no theory there. We begin with an a priori truth, or self-evident truth. All men are mortal, or all people are mortal. John is a man. John is mortal. So this is our process. It's called deductive. We begin with the self-evident truths of the Vedas, just like Prabhupada did. He has a description in the Vedas of the moon, and it's a heavenly planet. It's like, actually, the moon is a higher planet than the sun. The sun is the beginning of the spiritual world, and the moon is a heavenly planet that's superior to the sun. It's also, according to 5th Canto Srimad Bhagavatam, 20 times bigger than the sun, and 1,600,000 miles farther away than the sun. So it's like almost 95 million miles away from the Earth. So therefore, it was impossible for a rocket with some astronauts to go to the moon in 4 or 5 days. Impossible. You can't go 95 million miles in 4 days. So all this led to Prabhupada finally saying they did not go emphatically, and we went over this very clearly. And then also we heard the testimony of Mr. Buzz Aldrin, who was one of the astronauts that so-called went to the moon, and he said the whole moon landing was a production. It was not factual, because there were no cameras on the moon. So how can you have a camera? How can you see what's the landing on the moon? And basically, he admitted in the Conan O'Brien show that they didn't go to the moon. Well, here we have a dilemma, because that means there was a gigantic hoax that's still being perpetrated today. And because of that, there's this false, let's say, laissez-faire for the scientists to get more and more money all the time to do more and more research. Just like there was one research project that cost $10 million and 10 years of research. And the final conclusion was, yes, you need a mother and father to raise a child. What? We don't have to do any research to know that, you see. But this is what's going on. This is all the nonsense that's going on in academia. They're doing all kinds of different research. And you see they come out with papers. They say, well, we just did a double-blind research on using chocolate, and we think that chocolate is very good for your health, but we have to do some more research to be absolutely sure. What? This is like waste of time and money and human potential, but this is what's going on. This whole idea of research, Prabhupada said you don't have to do any research. The research was already done by Brahma and other acharyas. All you have to do is simply follow what they said, and follow their conclusions. So what were their conclusions? It was very simple. You gradually become free from sense gratification, and how do you do that? It's by sense purification. And once the senses are purified, then you're no longer a victim of the three modes of material nature, and you attain Suddhasattva level, transcendental goodness, where you're free from the influence of goodness, passion, and ignorance. At that point, you begin to understand pure spiritual knowledge. You begin to understand even in the mode of goodness, or mundane goodness, but it'll never be complete unless you transcend to transcendental goodness. So that is our pedagogic technique of teaching. We teach people to control the senses and the mind. And how do you do that? You simply follow the four regulative principles. And then also you chant Hare Krishna, you eat only prasadam, you go on Sankirtan, you associate with devotees and do service in the temple, all these things. You come to the mode of goodness almost immediately. And then you continue following by hearing everyday Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and little by little, all your karma goes away, your previous karma goes away, or at least it's put on hold, and you transcend the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, and come to transcendental goodness. At that point, you understand spiritual knowledge, you see things correctly, and you're able to function in this material world without becoming a victim of Maya. So, basically, that's what's being said. And then the next verse says, the splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, Krishna says. And the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me. So all these things are coming from Krishna. We depend on the sun. Yad aditya gatam tejo jagat vasayate kilam. Yat chandra masi chajagno tat tejo vidi mamakam. The splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me. And the purport, Prabhupada says, the unintelligent cannot understand how things are taking place, but one can begin to be established in knowledge by understanding what the Lord explains here. Everyone sees the sun, moon, fire, and electricity. One should simply try to understand that the splendor of the sun, the splendor of the moon, and the splendor of electricity or fire are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In such a conception of life, the beginning of Krishna consciousness lies a great deal of advancement for the conditioned soul in this material world. Okay, so it says, in such a conception of life, that is, that all these essential things on which life depends, sunlight and moonlight and electricity and so forth, and fire, they're all coming from Krishna. So it says, this is the beginning of Krishna consciousness, and when you begin to understand this, and there is a great deal of advancement for the conditioned soul in the material world, if you accept this. So we have to accept the origin of things. Material science is not interested so much in the origin of things or in the finality of things. They're interested in the middle. They can talk about that. But when you begin to talk about the origin of things, then they come up with very crazy theories like Big Bang Theory, or we all come from monkeys, or the idea that there are no, they don't really think that there are living entities on other planets, or if there are, there might only be one or two. So these are all theories. There's no evidence to prove any of those statements, but yet they teach that in books as if it's science. So here it's saying that the beginning of Krishna consciousness is when you accept these a priori statements of Krishna. And he's saying he's the origin of the sun and the moon and the fire and electricity. So we need these things every day. Every day you're cooking your food. You have either an electric stove or a gas stove, or you have a fire. And you have the sun that's rising every day, and you have the moon at night. So all these things we take for granted, but actually we should understand what is the origin of these things, and that's Krishna. Then it says, the living entities are essentially the parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, and he is giving herewith the hint how they can come back to Godhead, back to home. From this verse, we can understand that the sun is illuminating the whole solar system. So here we're going to come into another major false idea of the scientists. They think that every star is a sun, but that's not true. There's only one sun in the universe, and there's only one sun in every universe. There are many, many other universes and many of them are more complicated than our universe. And in each universe there are Brahmas. Like our Brahma has 4 heads. He needs 4 heads to manage everything. But there are universes in which Brahma has 1,000 heads. They're much more complicated universes. We have no knowledge of that. The scientists have no knowledge. They think there might be something like that, but they don't know what it is. So we see that there are many, many things the scientists have not discovered yet. And there are many, many things, because they don't have genuine knowledge, they have speculative theories about these things, and they present those theories often as if they are true. Okay, so from this verse we can understand that the sun is illuminating the whole solar system. There are different universes and solar systems, and there are different suns, moons, and planets also. But in each universe, there's only one sun. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 10:21, the moon is one of the stars. Nakshatram aham Shashi, sunlight is due to the spiritual effulgence in the spiritual sky of the Supreme Lord. In other words, the sunlight is a reflection of the Brahma Jyoti, which is the effulgence of the body of Krishna. Okay? With the rise of the sun, the activities of human beings are set up. They set fire to prepare their foodstuff. They set fire to start the factories, etc. So many things are done with the help of fire. Therefore, sunrise, fire, and moonlight are so pleasing to the living entities. Without their help, no living entity can live. So, if one can understand that the light and splendor of the sun, moon, and fire are emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, then once Krishna consciousness will begin. So this is exactly what is being rejected by modern education. The fact that Krishna is the source of all these necessities, like the sun, the moon, fire, electricity. So they don't teach you that. Do they teach you that in your school? Everything comes from Krishna? Huh? No. What? They don't talk about it. Why? Because they want to mislead you so that you can be exploited and buy junk products that they make. They want you to become a consumer and buy, so many cars and so many medicines and so many this and so many that, and just waste your time working really, really hard, making as much money as you can and wasting it and buying useless things that are not necessary. Okay, so Krishna then, so it says, without their help, no living entity can live. So if one can understand that the light and splendor of the sun, moon, and fire are emanating from the Supreme Personality Godhead, Krishna, then one's Krishna consciousness will begin. By the moon sign, all the vegetables are nourished. The moonshine is also pleasing. The moon sign is so pleasing that people can easily understand that they are living by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. This was the understanding previously in Bharat. Everyone understood we're living by the mercy of Krishna. We're not independent. Today, everyone says, oh, we're all independent. We don't need religion. We have science. But that's a junk science, and it just gives misleading knowledge, and therefore people are failing in achieving liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Without his mercy, there cannot be sun. Without his mercy, there cannot be moon. And without his mercy, there cannot be fire. And without the help of sun, moon, and fire, no one can live. These are some thoughts to provoke Krishna consciousness in the conditioned soul. So this is a very interesting purport in Bhagavad Gita. We don't really understand how profound the Bhagavad Gita is. The whole Vedic knowledge is in this one short book of 700 verses. If we just study this one book carefully, we have all knowledge. You don't have to read many books. Just like that man read so many books, but actually he didn't really understand anything. He got confused. And that's why in the 14th mantra of Ishopanishad, Prabhupada says, it's better to be less educated than over-educated. Because then, if you get too much education, you never come up with clear-cut understanding of what is the truth. You say, well, Schopenhauer said this, and Nietzsche said that, and Sartre said this other thing, and this other guy, Socrates, he said this, and Aristotle said that. So you never come to a conclusion. You're just saying, well, this science, this theory is saying this thing, and that theory is saying something else. So, therefore, throw away all that junk and just study this one book, Bhagavad Gita. You'll get all knowledge, and you'll be a success in life. Okay, let's stop right there. Are there any questions? You see how Prabhupada makes everything real simple. Not Prabhupada, but Krishna, but Prabhupada is simply repeating. He made it real simple. If you can understand how we depend on the sun, the moon, the light of the sun, the light of the moon, the light of electricity, the light of fire and heat for our life, and those things come from Krishna, then we begin to become Krishna conscious. If we say, no, those things, they just like the Buddhists, they say, well, material nature is eternal, so you don't have to talk about the existence of God. So everybody wants to make God minus and come up with their own theories. And therefore, people never really achieve liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So no question? Yes, Prabhupada. Give her the equal opportunity microphone.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I'm currently reading Prabhupada Leelamrita and I'm on book 5. Just looking at all the initial disciples of Prabhupada, most of them were younger, like especially in the West, like in their 20s. So for them, maybe they didn't read too much philosophy. They were fresh in a way, and maybe it was very easy for them to understand Prabhupada's philosophy.
There's no maybe.
Okay, they understood Prabhupada's philosophy, or what the Prabhupada philosophy the Prabhupada was
No, but
bringing.
they're like you have Hayagriva. He was highly educated, and Ray Rama, he was very highly educated. No, they were philosophical. They were college students.
I think the question I'm trying to ask Maharaj here is, are there any examples of exactly what you're talking about? Because there are people who have read so much in their lives, who have like maybe a hodgepodge of understanding. Are there any examples of them hearing Prabhupada, and what kind of technique Prabhupada used to convince them or help them understand?
Well, he gave them shastric evidences. Just like, we read the lecture 5.5.1, Srimad Bhagavatam. Every sentence he gave shastric evidence. There's another lecture we're going to go over. Every statement he makes, he gives shastric evidence right away. And that no ordinary person can do that. You have to be completely a master of the shastric evidence to be able to give shastric evidence for every statement that you're making. Right? So this is what gradually the devotees understood, that Prabhupada was not giving any personal opinion. He was only repeating what was shastrically presented by the previous acharyas and originally by Krishna himself. So not any Tom, Dick, or Harry can do that. You have to be highly purified of the false ego to be able to repeat exactly the original statements of Krishna in context of a class. Right? You make so many different points in a class, but you have to have the shastric evidence to show that you're not making anything up. And every disciple has the right to say, oh, Prabhu, you just said this. Where is that said by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita or by the acharyas in the Srimad Bhagavatam? You have a right to ask that question. And if it turns out that the person gave an opinion rather than something that's shastrically validated, then you can ignore that. Like at one point, there was this one sannyasi guru in ISKCON, and he started giving sannyas to women. So there's never anything, the women do not take sannyas. Now some people say, oh, well, that's mean. No, it's just a fact. In fact, one of the women he gave sannyas to was murdered because she gave a lecture to this warlord about how he should put down his guns and become peaceful. So the warlord came back with some of his men and had machine guns and killed her and killed some other people also. So, this taking sannyas is not, it's not for women. It's basically for men. But women can live like sannyasis. Uh, a renounced life. There's no let's say, precaution there. But to take sannyas and just be a itinerant traveler and preaching and never staying more than 3 days or 5 days in one place, that's not something that should be done by women. But they can live like sannyasis in completely renounced life, and there are many examples of that. So whenever we diverge from shastric evidence, there's going to be havoc. And that's why Prabhupada, almost every statement he makes, he gives the shastric evidence. Or he gives a, let's say, parallel or a parallel statement that contains the same points as the Shastra. So either he gives the Shastric evidence or he gives a parallel translation of a verse that has exactly the same meaning. And so therefore, we can give examples of that, and you'll see. So this is, only a Mahabhagavat devotee can do that. One who is at the top post level. Just like someone asked me a question yesterday. He said, are there different levels of Krishna consciousness? I said, yes. There's Kanishta Adhikari, there's Madhyama Adhikari, and there's Uttama Adhikari. So Uttama Adhikari is a pure devotee, and he or she only speaks shastrically. And the lower levels, Madhyama, who also knows Shastra but not perfectly, but does, try and back up whatever they say with Shastra, but not as perfectly as the Uttama Adhikari. And the Kanishta Adhikari doesn't really understand Shastra very well. They have some understanding, may not be as much as the Madhyama Adhikari. And they can easily be bewildered also. So there are different levels of devotees. So we should at least try and come to the Madhyama Adhikari level and try and get out of being a Kanishta Adhikari. So these are different things that we learn as we go along. But the level of Srila Prabhupada, he's on the top level of Uttama Adhikari. And therefore, he can give a lecture that's completely shastric. And it's very difficult to emulate that by us. So therefore, the more we repeat what Srila Prabhupada has said, the better. That way we don't have to up. Okay.
That means at least the people have to accept the authority of Shastras, but there are some people who don't even do that.
Well, okay, there's different levels of Shastras also. Just like you have 108 Upanishads, you have, you have 18 Puranas. So some of the Puranas are for people in the mode of ignorance, some are in the mode of passion, and some are for the mode of goodness. So, there's different sloks for different folks, as we say in English. So, we stick to Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam is, the summum bonum, the top scripture in the whole universe, as well as Bhagavad Gita, which is Krishna speaking about himself, and the Srimad Bhagavatam is pure devotees speaking about Krishna. So those are the two main literatures. Then there's the Nectar of Devotion, there's the Ishopanishad, there's Chaitanya Charitamrita. So these are the scriptures that are aiming at pure bhakti right away. They're not trying to say, well, you start off with the mixed bhakti, and then you come a little bit more here and there. No. These scriptures are talking about coming right away to the level of pure bhakti. And that's by following the regulative principles. And also taking initiation and strictly following chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and strictly following the regulative principles, almost immediately you come to the mode of goodness. And now you make spiritual progress. So that's our progress. That's our process. Now some people say, no, that's too fast. I want to go a lot slower. Okay, you can do that if you want. But Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya, they made things, Lord Chaitanya especially made everything very easy to become Krishna conscious. So why not take the easy route? Some people say, no, that's too easy. Give me something more complicated. Well, they can't even do the easy one. How are they going to do the more complicated one, you see? So it's all nonsense. There's just excuses being made so they can avoid becoming strict about spiritual life.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Any other questions? All right. Then we will stop and have Guru Puja. Haribol. Thank you very much. Who is going to sing? Okay.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Keval Sadma
Shri Guru Charana Padma He Vallabha Kati Sakma
Pannamui Sabadana Mate
Mando Mui Sabadana Mate
Chahara Prasade Bai E Baba Toriya Jai Krishna Prapti Ho Jaha Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chittata Koriya Kya
Guru
Arna Koriyo Mane Asha Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttama Gati Jai Prasad Pure Sarva Asha चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से दिव्यगान हृदय प्रकाशित प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते वेद गाय चहर चरित श्री गुरु करुण सिंधु आदम जनर बंधु लोकनाथ लोकेरा जीवाना हा प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पद छाया एबे गाइस गो सुखी भुवाना श्रील प्रभुपाद पतित पावना जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांता स्वामी नित्यानामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य विषतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवत्सरित गौर भक्त वृंदा Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anant Koti Vaishnava ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Shri Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sankund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Mayapura Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Tulasi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Ganga Maya ki jai. Jamuna Maya ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Nitai Gaura Premanand. All glories to his holiness. All glories to some of the Buddhas. All glories to some of the Buddhas. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Patita Pavani ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishna. Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati. Gauravani Pracharini Nirvisesa Sunyavadi. Paskar Kirtisatari Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The lotus feet of our spiritual master, the only way by which we
The
can
pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wishes in my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet, the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with sense and knowledge. He is my Lord, breath after breath. From him extract permanent emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing his character. Our spiritual master, the ocean master, the defender of the poor, and Lord and master of the devotees. We must bring us on to us. May you share the lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the world.